The morning sun was just beginning to peek through the clouds when Robert stepped out of his rental car in the parking lot of St. Mary's Regional Hospital. He stretched his tired muscles and took a deep breath of the crisp morning air. The flight from Chicago had been long and bumpy, and he felt every bit of his 45 years as he grabbed his worn leather briefcase from the back seat. Robert wasn't dressed like most people expected a successful businessman to look. After 3 days of back-to-back meetings in Chicago, he had chosen comfort over formality for his early morning flight. His favorite pair of well-worn jeans fit perfectly, and the navy blue polo shirt he wore was soft from years of washing. His sneakers were clean, but clearly had seen many miles. To anyone watching, he looked like an ordinary guy going about his day. But Robert was far from ordinary. 20 years ago, he had served his country with honor in 2 tours overseas. The discipline and leadership skills he learned in the military had served him well in the business world. After returning home, he had built a successful consulting company from nothing, working 16-hour days and never giving up on his dreams. His hard work had paid off beyond his wildest expectations. Now Robert sat on the boards of several major companies and was known throughout the city as a generous philanthropist. He had donated millions to various causes, always preferring to give quietly without seeking recognition. St. Mary's Hospital held a special place in his heart because this was where his late mother had received excellent care during her final years. As he walked toward the main entrance of the impressive brick building, Robert couldn't help but smile thinking about the board meeting he was about to attend. Today they would be discussing the new children's wing that his foundation was helping to fund. The project had been his idea, inspired by memories of his own childhood visits to hospitals that weren't nearly as welcoming or comfortable as they could have been. The automatic doors whooshed open and Robert stepped into the spacious lobby. The morning rush was in full swing, with doctors, nurses, and visitors moving purposefully in all directions. The smell of coffee from the nearby cafe mixed with the clean scent of hospital antiseptic. Robert had been in this lobby dozens of times over the past 3 years, but he never got tired of seeing the positive energy of people working to help others. Behind the main security desk, David Mitchell was starting what he expected to be another routine Tuesday morning. At 38 years old, David had worked hospital security for nearly a decade. He took pride in his job and genuinely believed he was protecting the hospital and its patients. However, David had grown up in a small town where everyone looked pretty much the same, and he had never really examined his own assumptions about people who looked different from him. David's eyes immediately locked onto Robert as he entered the lobby. Something about the casually dressed black man with the briefcase didn't sit right with him. In David's mind, people who belonged in the executive areas of the hospital wore suits and ties. They looked professional and important. This guy looked like he was heading to a weekend barbecue, not a business meeting. Robert, completely unaware that he was being watched, stopped at the information desk to chat briefly with Mrs. Patterson, the elderly volunteer who had worked there for 15 years. She smiled warmly and asked about his recent travels. Robert always made time for these small conversations because he believed that treating everyone with kindness and respect was one of the most important things a person could do. David's suspicion grew as he watched this interaction. Why would someone who didn't belong here be so comfortable talking to the staff? In his experience, people who were up to no good tried to blend in by acting friendly. He decided to keep a close eye on this situation. After finishing his conversation with Mrs. Patterson, Robert headed toward the bank of elevators that led to the upper floors where the administrative offices were located. His meeting was scheduled to start in 15 minutes, and he liked to arrive a few minutes early. As chairman of the board, he felt it was important to set a good example for punctuality. The elevator area was busy with morning foot traffic. Doctors in white coats hurried between floors, nurses pushed supply carts, and various administrative staff members moved purposefully through their daily routines. Robert pressed the button for the 8th floor where the boardroom was located. David watched all of this from across the lobby, his concern growing with each step Robert took toward the executive floors. In his mind, he was putting together a story that made sense to him. Here was someone who clearly didn't belong in the upper levels of the hospital, trying to gain access to areas where important people worked and sensitive information was kept. What David didn't know was that Robert's name was engraved on a plaque in the main lobby, recognizing his generous contributions to the hospital. He didn't know that Robert had personally interviewed and approved the hiring of several department heads. He didn't know that Robert had spent countless hours in planning meetings, working with architects and designers to make sure the new children's wing would be perfect. All David saw was his own assumptions and fears, wrapped up in what he thought was professional vigilance. As Robert waited for the elevator, he checked his phone for any last-minute messages from his assistant. The elevator dinged, and the doors opened. Several people stepped out, including Dr. Rodriguez from the cardiology department, who nodded respectfully at Robert. Dr. Rodriguez had presented to the board several times and knew Robert well, but David was too far away to see this interaction clearly. All he saw was Robert stepping into an elevator that would take him to floors where David believed he didn't belong. The security guard's sense of duty kicked into high gear. He had been trained to be alert for anything unusual, and, in his mind, this definitely qualified. David quickly left his post at the security desk and hurried toward the elevators. He pressed the button repeatedly, frustrated that he might have already lost track of his suspect. When the next elevator arrived, David stepped inside and pressed the button for the 8th floor, his heart racing with the adrenaline of what he believed was a potential security situation. Robert, meanwhile, had arrived at the 8th floor and was walking down the familiar hallway toward the boardroom. The walls were lined with photos of the hospital's history and portraits of previous board members. Robert always enjoyed seeing these reminders of the institution's proud tradition of service to the community. He was looking forward to today's meeting because they would be reviewing the final plans for the children's wing. The project represented everything Robert believed in, using success and resources to make life better for others, especially children who were facing difficult times. As Robert approached the boardroom, he had no idea that David was stepping out of the elevator behind him, convinced that he was about to prevent some kind of security breach. The two men were on a collision course that would change both of their lives in ways neither could imagine. The morning that had started so peacefully was about to take a dramatic and unexpected turn. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, and David stepped out onto the 8th floor, his eyes immediately scanning the hallway. He spotted Robert about 30 feet ahead, walking calmly toward the end of the corridor where the executive offices were located. David's heart was pounding as he quickened his pace, convinced he was about to stop someone who had no business being in this part of the hospital. Robert was checking his watch when he heard heavy footsteps behind him. He was still 5 minutes early for his meeting, which gave him a moment to review his notes about the children's wing project. The morning light streaming through the tall windows created a peaceful atmosphere, and Robert felt grateful for another opportunity to help make a difference in people's lives. "Excuse me," David called out, his voice carrying a sharp edge that echoed off the polished floors. "Hey, you need to stop right there." Robert turned around, slightly surprised to see a security guard approaching him with such urgency. David was a stocky man in his late 30s, wearing a dark blue uniform with patches and a badge that caught the morning light. His face was flushed, and his breathing was slightly heavy from hurrying to catch up. "Good morning," Robert said, with a friendly smile, assuming the guard might need directions or have some routine question. "Is there something I can help you with?" David's expression hardened when he heard Robert's calm, educated tone. In his mind, this just confirmed that the man was trying to act like he belonged here. "I need to see some identification," David demanded, stopping just a few feet away from Robert. "And I need to know what you're doing up here." Robert's smile faded slightly as he realized this wasn't a friendly encounter. He had experienced situations like this before, though not recently, and he recognized the tone and body language. Still, he remained calm and reached for his wallet. "Of course," he said quietly. "I'm here for a meeting." "A meeting?" David's voice was loud enough that a few people in nearby offices glanced out their doors. "What kind of meeting? With who?" As Robert pulled out his driver's license, David barely glanced at it. Instead, he was focused on Robert's casual clothing and the worn briefcase. "This says you're from Chicago," David said, his suspicion growing. "What's someone from Chicago doing in our executive offices?" "I travel quite a bit for business," Robert explained patiently. I just flew in this morning for a board meeting. If you'd like to verify that, you can call the administrator's office. David's laugh was cold and dismissive. A board meeting? Right. Look, I don't know what you're trying to pull here, but you're not fooling anyone. People who attend board meetings don't show up looking like they're going to a basketball game. The comment hit Robert like a physical blow, but he kept his expression neutral. He had learned long ago that responding to ignorance with anger only made situations worse. I understand you're doing your job, Robert said, his voice steady but firm. But I do have a meeting to attend. Perhaps we could resolve this quickly. The only thing we're going to resolve is getting you out of here, David replied, his voice getting louder. I've been watching you since you walked in. You don't belong in this hospital, and you definitely don't belong on this floor. By now, several people had emerged from their offices to see what was causing the commotion. A young woman from the accounting department stood in her doorway looking uncomfortable. An older man from the legal department frowned as he watched the scene unfold. Neither wanted to get involved, but both seemed troubled by what they were witnessing. Robert noticed the growing audience and felt a familiar mixture of embarrassment and frustration. He had worked hard his entire life to earn respect and recognition, yet here he was being treated like a criminal based on nothing more than his appearance and clothing choices. Sir, Robert said, his voice still calm but with a slight edge, I'm asking you to please lower your voice. If you have concerns about my presence here, I'm happy to have someone verify my appointment. David stepped closer, his body language becoming more aggressive. Don't tell me how to do my job, I know exactly what I'm dealing with here. You probably saw some expensive cars in the parking lot and thought you'd come up here to see what you could steal. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several of the onlookers gasped audibly, and Robert felt his jaw tighten. But instead of exploding with anger, he took a deep breath and spoke even more quietly than before. I'm going to ask you one more time to contact the administrator's office, Robert said. My name is Robert Thompson, and I'm expected in the boardroom in about 3 minutes. I don't care what your name is, David shot back. And I don't care what story you've cooked up. What I care about is protecting this hospital from people who don't belong here. The young woman from accounting couldn't stay silent any longer. Excuse me, she said, stepping partially into the hallway. Maybe we should just make a quick phone call to clear this up. David whirled around to face her. Ma'am, please go back to your office. This is a security matter, and I need you to let me handle it. But if he says he has a meeting, she began. He's lying, David interrupted. It's obvious he's lying. Look at him. Does he look like someone who would be meeting with our board of directors? The question echoed down the hallway, and Robert felt the weight of every pair of eyes on him. He thought about his military service, his years of building a successful business, his philanthropy, and his genuine desire to help people. None of that seemed to matter in this moment. I've been patient with you, Robert said, his voice still controlled but with steel underneath. But your behavior is inappropriate and unprofessional. I'm asking you to step aside so I can attend my meeting. David's face reddened with anger. You're not going anywhere except back downstairs and out of this building, and if you don't cooperate, I'm going to call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. The threat of arrest caused a stir among the onlookers. Several people pulled out their phones, though it wasn't clear if they were calling for help or recording the encounter. The tension in the hallway was thick enough to cut with a knife. Robert looked at his watch and realized his meeting was supposed to start in less than 2 minutes. The other board members would be wondering where he was. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was being prevented from attending a meeting where they would discuss his latest donation to help children in need. This is your last chance, David said, his hand moving toward his radio. Leave now or I'm calling for backup and having you removed. Robert stood his ground, his dignity intact despite the humiliating situation. He had faced worse challenges in his life, and he wasn't about to back down from a bully, even one wearing a security uniform. The confrontation had reached a breaking point, and everyone in the hallway could feel that something was about to give way. David reached for his radio with one hand while pointing at Robert with the other. Security to the 8th floor, he spoke into the device. I need backup immediately. We have a situation with an individual who refuses to leave the premises. Why? crackling response from the radio was loud enough for everyone to hear. "Copy that, David. Unit 2 is on the way." Robert closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath to maintain his composure. He had been in difficult situations before, but this felt different. The public nature of the humiliation, combined with the complete disregard for his dignity, was testing every lesson he had learned about patience and self-control. "This is really unnecessary," Robert said, his voice still calm, but with an undertone that suggested his patience was wearing thin. All of this could be avoided with one simple phone call. A small crowd had now gathered in the hallway. The young accountant was still standing in her doorway, her phone in her hand as she recorded the encounter. She looked torn between wanting to help and not wanting to get involved in what was clearly becoming a serious situation. From the legal department office, Mr. Peterson emerged completely. He was an older man with gray hair and kind eyes who had worked at the hospital for over 20 years. He had seen Robert at several board meetings over the past 3 years, though they had never been formally introduced. "Excuse me," Mr. Peterson said, approaching slowly with his hands visible. "Perhaps I could help clarify the situation." David immediately turned his attention to the older man. "Sir, I need you to step back. This is a security matter, and civilian staff should not be involved." "I understand your concern," Mr. Peterson replied diplomatically, "but I work in the legal department and I'm familiar with our protocols. Maybe we could just verify if this gentleman has an appointment before calling additional security." "He doesn't have an appointment," David stated firmly. "People with real appointments don't show up dressed like this, and they don't act suspicious when questioned." Robert felt his jaw clench at the word suspicious. Everything he had done since entering the hospital had been completely normal and appropriate. The only thing suspicious was David's immediate assumption that he didn't belong there. "What exactly have I done that seems suspicious to you?" Robert asked, his tone still controlled but with a slight edge. David seemed almost eager to answer this question. "First, you entered the building dressed inappropriately for any legitimate business meeting. Second, you were asking questions at the information desk, probably trying to gather information about our security procedures. Third, you went straight to the executive floors without checking in with anyone. And fourth, when I questioned you, you got defensive instead of being cooperative." Each accusation felt like another slap to Robert's face. The idea that talking politely to Mrs. Patterson was somehow suspicious, or that his casual clothing was evidence of criminal intent, would have been laughable if it weren't so personally painful. "I spoke with Mrs. Patterson because she's a lovely woman who always asks about my travels," Robert explained. "I'm dressed casually because I just came off a red-eye flight and didn't see the need to wear a suit for a meeting with people who know me well. And I'm not being defensive, I'm trying to prevent an embarrassing mistake." "Mistake?" David's voice rose again. "The only mistake here would be letting you continue this charade. I've been doing this job for 10 years and I know how to spot someone who doesn't belong." More people had emerged from their offices now. A nurse who had been delivering paperwork to the administrative floor stopped to watch. 2 maintenance workers who had been replacing light bulbs paused their work. Everyone seemed to sense that something significant was happening, though most were too uncomfortable to intervene directly. The young accountant, whose name was Jennifer, finally stepped fully into the hallway. She was in her mid-20s, fresh out of college, and had been working at the hospital for only 6 months. But she had attended the last board meeting as part of her training, and she was almost certain she recognized Robert. "I think I might know this gentleman," Jennifer said quietly, her voice shaking slightly with nervousness. David spun around to face her. "Ma'am, I already told you to go back to your office. You're interfering with a security operation." "But I really think I've seen him before," Jennifer insisted, her voice getting a little stronger. "At a board meeting, I think he might actually—" "He's not on any board," David cut her off sharply. "Look at him. Does he look like someone who would be making decisions for this hospital? Use your common sense." The dismissive tone and the implication stung Robert deeply. He thought about all the hours he had spent in meetings, reviewing budgets, interviewing candidates, and working to improve patient care. He thought about the check he had written just last month to fund new equipment for the emergency department. "Young lady," Robert said to Jennifer, his voice gentle despite his frustration. "What's your name?" "Jennifer Martinez," she replied, looking nervously between Robert and David. "Jennifer, you're right that you've seen me before. I remember you from the October board meeting. You gave an excellent presentation about the quarterly financial reports." Jennifer's eyes widened with recognition. "Oh my goodness, yes. You asked about the pediatric department funding. You're nobody," David interrupted loudly. "He's nobody, and he's trying to manipulate you by pretending to remember some meeting. This is exactly the kind of con game these people run." The phrase "these people" hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several of the onlookers shifted uncomfortably, and Mr. Peterson's expression darkened considerably. "Officer," Mr. Peterson said, his voice now carrying a note of authority, "I think you need to be very careful about what you're saying and how you're handling this situation." "I'm handling it exactly the way I'm supposed to," David replied defensively. "My job is to protect this hospital, and that's what I'm doing." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the hallway as backup security arrived. 2 additional guards rounded the corner, looking serious and ready for action. When they saw the crowd that had gathered, they exchanged glances of confusion. "What's the situation, David?" one of them asked. "We have an individual who gained unauthorized access to the executive floor," David replied, pointing at Robert. "He's refusing to leave and claims to have a meeting with the board of directors." One of the backup guards looked at Robert, then at the crowd of hospital employees, then back at David. Something about the situation didn't seem right to him. The alleged intruder was calm and well-spoken, while David seemed unusually agitated. "Sir," the backup guard said to Robert, "could you please explain why you're here today?" Robert felt a small glimmer of hope that this guard might be more reasonable. "I'm here for a board meeting that was scheduled to start 5 minutes ago. My name is Robert Thompson, and I'm the chairman of the board of directors." The backup guard looked surprised and turned to David. "Did you verify this with the administrator's office?" "I don't need to verify anything," David replied impatiently. "It's obvious he's lying. Just look at him." But the backup guard was looking at him, and he was seeing something different than what David saw. He saw a middle-aged man in clean, casual clothing who spoke with intelligence and dignity. He saw someone who remained calm under pressure and spoke respectfully to everyone around him. "Maybe we should make that phone call," the backup guard suggested. "We're not making any phone calls," David snapped. "We're removing this individual from the premises, and we're doing it now." The confrontation had reached a critical point. Multiple people were now recording with their phones. Some hospital employees were clearly recognizing Robert, and the backup security seemed uncertain about David's handling of the situation. Robert looked around at all the faces staring at him and made a decision. He was tired of being patient, tired of being reasonable, and tired of being treated like a criminal in a place where he had given so much of his time and money to help others. "I've tried to handle this quietly and professionally," Robert said, his voice carrying across the hallway. "But your security officer has made that impossible, so let me be very clear about who I am and why I'm here." The sound of high heels clicking rapidly on the polished floor cut through the tension like a knife. Everyone turned to see Dr. Catherine Williams, the hospital's chief of staff, hurrying down the hallway with an expression of concern and confusion on her face. She had been in her office preparing for the board meeting when her assistant had rushed in to tell her about some kind of disturbance on the 8th floor. Dr. Williams was a woman in her early 50s with silver-streaked hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She had worked her way up through the hospital hierarchy over 25 years, earning respect through her dedication to patient care and her ability to handle difficult situations with wisdom and grace. As she approached the crowd, her eyes immediately found Robert standing in the center of the chaos, surrounded by security guards and onlookers. Her heart sank as she realized what was happening, and her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "What on earth is going on here?" Dr. Williams demanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being in charge. David, still convinced he was handling a security threat, stepped forward eagerly. "Dr. Williams, thank goodness you're here. We have an individual who gained unauthorized access to the executive floor. He's been claiming to have a meeting with the board, but obviously that's impossible. I've been trying to remove him from the premises, but he's been uncooperative." Dr. Williams looked at David with an expression that made several people in the crowd step back instinctively. When she spoke, her voice was deadly quiet. "Officer Mitchell, do you have any idea who you're talking about?" The use of his full name made David pause for a moment, but he pressed on confidently. "Ma'am, I don't know what story he's told you, but this individual clearly doesn't belong in this part of the hospital. Just look at his appearance and—" "Stop talking," Dr. Williams interrupted, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Stop talking. Right now." She turned to Robert, and her entire demeanor changed. Her face softened with genuine respect and concern. "Mr. Thompson, I am so deeply sorry about this situation. Please accept my sincere apologies on behalf of the entire hospital." The hallway fell completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop as everyone processed what they had just heard. David's confident expression began to falter as he saw the respect and deference in Dr. Williams' voice and posture. "Dr. Williams," Robert said quietly, his dignity intact despite everything he had endured, "I appreciate your concern, but I think there may be a larger issue here that needs to be addressed." "You're absolutely right," Dr. Williams replied, then turned to address the crowd that had gathered. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Robert Thompson, the chairman of our board of directors and one of the most generous benefactors in this hospital's history." The words hit the crowd like a physical wave. Jennifer, the young accountant, gasped audibly and covered her mouth with her hands. Mr. Peterson from the legal department shook his head sadly, having suspected something like this might be the case. The backup security guards looked at each other with expressions of shock and concern. But it was David's reaction that was most dramatic. His face went through a series of changes, first confusion, then disbelief, then a growing horror as the full magnitude of his mistake began to sink in. The color drained from his face and his hands started to shake slightly. "That's impossible," David whispered, but his voice lacked any conviction. "He can't be. I mean, look at him." Dr. Williams' eyes flashed with anger. "Look at him? What exactly are we supposed to see when we look at him, Officer Mitchell? Please enlighten us." David opened his mouth, but no words came out. For the first time since the confrontation began, he was completely speechless. "Mr. Thompson," Dr. Williams continued, turning back to Robert, "has personally donated over $3 million to this hospital in the past 5 years. The new children's wing that we're building, the one that will help thousands of sick children, that's happening because of his generosity." Each word felt like a hammer blow to David's consciousness. He thought about every assumption he had made, every accusation he had thrown, every moment of disrespect he had shown to someone who had done more for the hospital than David could ever imagine. The emergency department equipment that saved 2 lives just last week? Dr. Williams went on, her voice growing stronger. "Mr. Thompson funded that. The scholarship program that's helping 12 nursing students get their degrees? That's his program? The free clinic that serves the underserved community? He built that." Robert held up a gentle hand. "Dr. Williams, while I appreciate your words, I don't think this is the time or place for Oh, but I think it is exactly the time and place," she interrupted firmly. "Because apparently some people in this hospital need to understand who they're dealing with before they can treat someone with basic human dignity and respect." The crowd was completely silent now, with many people looking down at their feet in embarrassment. Several were still recording with their phones, though now their motivation seemed different. This was clearly a moment that would be remembered and discussed for years to come. David finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. I didn't know. I mean, how was I supposed to? Supposed to what?" Dr. Williams shot back. "Supposed to treat someone with respect regardless of how they're dressed? Supposed to listen when someone tells you they have a legitimate reason to be here? Supposed to make a simple phone call to verify information before humiliating someone in front of dozens of people?" David had no answer. He looked around at the faces staring at him, some with pity, others with obvious disapproval. The backup security guards had stepped away from him, clearly wanting to distance themselves from his actions. "Mr. Thompson," Dr. Williams said, her voice returning to a respectful tone, The rest of the board is waiting in the conference room. They were concerned when you didn't arrive on time, which is very unlike you." "I understand," Robert replied. "I'll be there in just a moment." "Actually," Dr. Williams said, her expression hardening again as she looked at David, "I think it would be appropriate for Officer Mitchell to personally escort you to the boardroom and offer you a proper apology." David looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. The idea of walking down that hallway with everyone watching, knowing that he had to apologize to someone he had just spent 20 minutes trying to have arrested, was almost too much to bear. "I don't think that's necessary," Robert said quietly. "We've all learned something today, and that's what matters." But Dr. Williams wasn't finished. "Mr. Thompson, your kindness and grace in this situation only make Officer Mitchell's behavior more inexcusable. This isn't just about a mistake. This is about fundamental respect for human dignity." She turned to address the entire crowd. "Let me be very clear to everyone here. What we've witnessed today is completely unacceptable. No one, and I mean no one, should ever be treated the way Mr. Thompson was treated, regardless of who they are or what they look like." Jennifer, the young accountant, stepped forward hesitantly. "Mr. Thompson, I'm so sorry I didn't speak up sooner. I knew I recognized you, but I was scared." Robert looked at her with understanding and compassion. "Jennifer, you did speak up, and that took courage. That's all any of us can do, find the courage to do what's right when it matters." David stood there watching this exchange, realizing that Robert was showing more grace and wisdom in this terrible moment than David had shown in the entire confrontation. The contrast between his own behavior and Robert's dignity was so stark, it was painful to witness. The revelation had changed everything, but the real reckoning was just beginning. The hallway remained silent for what felt like an eternity. Robert looked around at all the faces staring at him, some filled with shame, others with admiration for how he had handled the situation. He could see phones still recording, and he knew that this moment would likely be seen by thousands of people within hours. Instead of anger or demands for punishment, Robert saw this as an opportunity to teach something important. He had learned long ago that real change came not from revenge but from understanding and education. "I'd like to say something to everyone here," Robert began, his voice calm but carrying easily down the hallway. "What happened today wasn't really about me. It was about something much bigger that affects people every single day." David stood frozen, still processing the reality of his situation. His face had gone from red with anger to pale with shock, and now it was flushed again with deep embarrassment. He wanted to apologize, to explain himself, to somehow undo the last 30 minutes, but he couldn't find the words. "When I walked into this hospital this morning," Robert continued, "I was just a man going to a meeting. But somewhere between the lobby and this hallway I became something else in someone's mind. I became a threat, a problem to be solved, someone who didn't belong." Jennifer wiped away tears that had started flowing down her cheeks. She thought about all the times she had made assumptions about people based on their appearance, and she felt ashamed of her own silent prejudices. "The truth is," Robert went on, "this could happen to anyone. It happens to people every day in hospitals, stores, offices, and schools across this country. People who are judged not by their character or their actions, but by how they look or what someone assumes about them." Mr. Peterson from the legal department stepped forward slightly. "Mr. Thompson, what you're saying is absolutely right, and I want you to know that this hospital does not tolerate this kind of behavior." "I appreciate that," Robert replied, "but I don't want anyone to think this is just about policy or rules. This is about seeing each other as human beings first." He turned to look directly at David, who was still standing there looking like he wanted to disappear. "Officer Mitchell, I can see that you're struggling with what happened here. I want you to know that I don't hate you and I don't think you're a bad person." David's eyes filled with tears. The kindness in Robert's voice was somehow harder to bear than anger would have been. "Sir, I don't know what to say. I was wrong. I was completely wrong." "You were wrong," Robert agreed gently. "But being wrong isn't the end of the world. The question is what you do with that knowledge now." Dr. Williams watched this exchange with a mixture of admiration for Robert and continued disappointment in David's earlier behavior. She knew that this incident would have serious consequences for David's employment, but she was also seeing something powerful in how Robert was choosing to handle it. "I grew up in a small town," David said quietly, his voice shaking. "I thought I wasn't prejudiced. I thought I was just doing my job. But hearing you talk about your donations, about all the good you've done for this hospital, I realize I never gave you a chance to show me who you really were." "That's exactly right," Robert said. "You decided who I was before you knew anything about me. But David, you're not the first person to do that, and you won't be the last. The important thing is that you understand it now." A small crowd had gathered at both ends of the hallway as word spread throughout the hospital about what was happening. Doctors, nurses, maintenance staff, and administrators all wanted to see how this situation would be resolved. "I want everyone here to understand something," Robert said, raising his voice slightly so everyone could hear. "I don't want Officer Mitchell to be fired or punished to make me feel better. What I want is for all of us to learn from this moment." David looked up in surprise. After everything he had done, after all the humiliation he had caused, Robert was actually trying to protect his job. "However," Dr. Williams interjected, "there will be consequences for what happened here today. This hospital has policies in place for a reason, and those policies were violated in multiple ways." Robert nodded. "I understand that, and I'm not trying to interfere with the hospital's procedures. But I do want to suggest something that might be more productive than just punishment." He paused, looking around at all the faces watching him. "I'd like to propose that Officer Mitchell and I work together on developing a training program for all hospital staff about unconscious bias and treating people with dignity and respect." The suggestion caused a stir among the crowd. It was not what anyone had expected to hear. "You see," Robert continued, "David made assumptions about me based on how I looked and how I was dressed. But I'm willing to bet that many of us in this hallway have made similar assumptions about other people at some point in our lives." Several people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the truth in his words. The difference is that David's assumptions became actions that hurt someone. But if we can learn from his mistake, then maybe some good can come from this difficult situation. Jennifer stepped forward again. "Mr. Thompson, I think that's an amazing idea. I know I need to examine my own biases more honestly." "We all do," Robert replied. "And that's not something to be ashamed of. It's something to work on." David finally found his voice again. "Sir, I would be honored to work with you on something like that. I need to understand how I let my prejudices take control like that." "It won't be easy," Robert warned. "You'll have to look at some uncomfortable truths about yourself. Are you ready for that?" David nodded, tears still visible in his eyes. "Yes, sir, I have to be. What I did today was wrong, and I need to make sure it never happens again." Dr. Williams looked thoughtful. "Mr. Thompson, I think your proposal has merit, but Officer Mitchell will still face disciplinary action according to our policies. What happened today cannot be ignored." "I understand completely," Robert replied. "And David, you need to understand that too. Actions have consequences, and learning from mistakes doesn't erase them." "I know," David said quietly. "I accept whatever consequences come from this." Over the next few minutes, the crowd began to disperse as people returned to their work. But many stopped to shake Robert's hand, or to apologize for not speaking up sooner. The maintenance workers, the nurses, the office staff, people from every level of the hospital hierarchy, all wanted to express their respect for how he had handled the situation. As the hallway finally began to clear, Robert turned to Dr. Williams. "I believe we still have a board meeting to attend. The Children's Wing project is too important to delay any further." Dr. Williams smiled for the first time since arriving on the scene. "You're absolutely right, and I think today's events have shown us just how important it is to create an environment where everyone feels welcome and respected." As they walked toward the boardroom, Robert thought about the phone videos that people had taken. By evening, the story would probably be all over social media. Some people would focus on David's mistakes, Others would celebrate Robert's grace in handling the situation. But Robert hoped that most people would see the real message, that change was possible, that people could learn from their mistakes, and that treating each other with dignity and respect was not just a nice idea. It was essential for building the kind of world where everyone could thrive. The morning had started with prejudice and assumptions, but it was ending with the possibility of real understanding and positive change. And sometimes Robert thought that was the best outcome anyone could hope for.